Good morning, everyone. It's V, the Guerrilla Economist, coming to you live. On this edition of V for Veles, we have with us the man of the hour, the one and only Dark Raven of the Deep State. He needs no introduction, folks. He drops intelligence, data, and beautiful bits of analysis like nobody's business. And we are talking about Veles. Veles, good morning, buddy. How are you?
Hello, my friend. How are you doing?
I'm doing good, man. Hanging in there. I can't complain. You know, it's another day. Fall is here, as you said before we went live.
Yep.
Jeez, I don't even get into that. But there's lots going on. We're in the heat of the election. The world is changing. Everybody's calling for peace. Supposedly Donald Trump, who everybody thinks is this fake TV star, all of a sudden he gets elected and the world starts changing. It's wild.
It is, and we're gonna get into that today, folks. Yeah, dogs and cats living together. So I got a lot of things I'm going to weave into today's program, folks. So just bear with me because not all of it is kind of linear, and I've got hints and things without my necessarily saying certain things. Also, some housekeeping. No show for me next week as I'll be traveling. And for those of you for whom my traveling is a cause of concern, you may want to get some aspirin now. Also, before I kind of move in today's content, and by the way, happy Armistice Day, happy Veterans Day for those of you who call it either of those two things. The 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. A refresh on kind of some themes with Rogue over the years. We also have to keep in mind our worldview regarding how the world's elites are organized, their goals and their beliefs. Whether it's the recent U.S. election or upcoming events, we have to do our best to remove our personal emotions and focus on those elections and events and the groups behind them. Small example, take Joe Rogan of podcasting and UFC fame. Who owns the UFC and WWE? A talent and entertainment company called Endeavor. Who's the CEO?
Ari Emanuel.
Ari Emanuel, brother of Ron Emanuel, of Barack Obama and former mayor of Chicago fame.
Dual citizen.
Another one, a third of our government. Who also, from a media perspective, is connected to Endeavor? Elon Musk. Does this mean Joe Rogan or Elon are good, bad, or something in between? Who knows? They're players, and alliances change. And you don't know the players without a program, folks. So that's part of the reason why we're here. First off, a compliment to all of you in the Rogue audience. And in all seriousness, I do want to compliment all of you. For V, myself, and others, we must be doing something right because you're all still with us after many years. At the same time, also people like Patrick Ryan, who stopped by our show a year or two ago, who also in his corner of the world is empowering and arming people with weapons of the future, as well as Matthew Arrett, who's achieved fusion with his work, obviously. When it comes to all of you, though, my compliments. The types of things I used to see said in the chat windows during Rogue programs several years ago, or in Discord or other platforms, has changed. And I see more and more of you out there conducting your own research, reading up on the law and civil procedure, and the list goes on. Mistakes are made along the way, but that's how we learn. And you're coming up with content even beyond the contributions of those of us on Rogue and coming up with your own new material, which is excellent. And my thanks to N.A. Knight, along with many others, for the tremendous postings many of you have been making, and in their case, extensive coverage of micronuclear reactors on the Discord page, which has been fantastic content. Because as we always have to remember, the battle has to be won in the mind before it's won in society, and you're all arming and training yourselves wonderfully. A correction on some prior programs while referencing Jerry Sandusky and the cover-up at Penn State, I've incorrectly stated a couple of times. I got the schools mixed up. I said University of Pennsylvania or similar. My apologies to all of those of you who attended the University of Pennsylvania. I meant to say Penn State. So rental cars and hotels, a kitchen table item for all of you, to paraphrase Mike Moore. Steve Lado of Lado's Law on YouTube has run several segments this year on things like the following. Hertz Rental Car has drawn Steve's attention on several occasions, including a recent story about a person who was being charged and sent to collections for damage to a rental car they never rented. The person's car was a different model with a different state license plate. No matter how much data he produced or documentation, Hertz kept pursuing him and telling him just to pay up. As a result, he hired a consumer protection group whose lawyers contacted Hertz, who then admitted they were in the wrong. What are your takeaways? First item, many of these consumers' attempts to reach Hertz were through call centers or online agents who may in fact be AI. The only way to achieve resolution was literally through attorneys. Second, more and more companies, whether rental car agencies, hotels, or even concert ticket organizations, are attempting to cut costs through offshore or AI interfaces with their customers. This opens the door for a lot of mistakes and, frankly, quote unquote, pay us or else instructions to those people in those systems. Third, when these firms are heavily pressed for revenue in a down economy, these sorts of things will happen. I've seen this before, especially back in 2001 and 2008. They will literally bully people into paying them money just so that they can achieve any kind of revenue when they're desperate. The consequence of that, 100% of the time, are lost customers, but as everyone is always thinking about short term, no one cares. Fourth, if this occurs to you, be sure to involve your organization's travel group to act on your behalf as much as your own attempts to resolve the matter, unless, of course, it was just something you did for yourself. And fifth, as I said, this is occurring with hotels and many other businesses. Therefore, you need to raise your caution level with services you leverage, whether personal or work travel. Sixth, and unfortunately, yes, you may need to take pictures of your hotel room upon leaving or your rental car at drop-off or similar. Better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it. I resented. Matthew Arrett would probably articulate the following better than I. To paraphrase Peter Griffin from the TV show Family Guy, this really grinds my gears. Our elite masters feel the need to inundate us all in aspects of our lives. They've inserted their ideology where it has no place. Case in point, an easy one. Remember the heady day when ESPN suddenly became a sounding board for every social issue on the planet? Don't forget, friends, during the Metro riots of 2020 at their height, there was not a single radio station on satellite radio who I swear was not involved with suggestive programming, from protest songs of the 1960s to hip-hop songs with anger against the police, and the list goes on. And this was all just coincidence? I think not. Then we have the website Jalopnik, a website for car enthusiasts, and now I have to read that one quickly, lest the hate spend too much time on my screen. Hate at anyone not buying an electric car. Hate at automakers who still build internal combustion engines. Never mind the Daily Mail article last week demonstrating the complete abandonment of EVs by all major automakers, as best articulated by VW now having to close car plants. Then the epitome of their hate manifesting every conceivable thing wrong with Elon Musk and his products. Oh, sure, we've covered on Rogue frequently who Elon is involved with, and the cars were just an exploit of carbon credits. As the old saying goes, I wish I'd thought of it. However, their derision of the man has no substance. As Gus Demos would say, it's solely because he's supposed to be on the narrative and isn't. I say on the narrative because Elon is a child of Silicon Valley, and how dare you go off topic. More important, you seem to be leading people to support a Trump presidency. The horror. Now the shift has occurred to yet another website dedicated to one of my interests. That would be the website The Daily Grail, who covers esoterica and archaeology. The last 2 months, you could see the website veer in the direction of ideology so clearly a blind man could see it. Like Jalopnik, a narrow filter applied to all news stories in archaeology and esoterica, usually boiling down to many prior civilizations' failure due to climate change. Never mind the fact that none of those civilizations drove Fords or burned diesel fuel. Also, how UFO sightings easily demonstrate how easily conservatives and libertarians can be easily turned into Nazis. In all seriousness, though, it's a major memory hole item. We're literally being fed this garbage in all aspects of our lives, from themed color schemes on food products to satellite radio advertising to QR code-driven restaurant menus with their daily dose of ideology in the corner. I just want to be able to go to...
You're breaking up.
Whoops, sorry. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I would like to be able to go to websites dedicated to my hobbies without Skynet writing articles. To quote Mick Jagger, get off my cloud. Speaking of hate, like many of you, I wondered how events would unfold following the election. I must say, so far, there's been some surprises. On the university front, we have both East and West Coast universities offering plenty of counselors and therapy animals to those struggling with the post-election results. In the case of the University of Oregon, noting the school's mascot, they added ducks to the various therapy animals who were available. I'm not kidding.
Oh, God.
One of the schools where I'm working sent no less than 5 communications the day after the election from senior leaders to my email distributions. Many of them noted leaders at the school should be mindful that both students and staff are so distraught their focus on their work or assignments will probably suffer for a week or two, and to please give them some room. Meanwhile, when asked why similar services were not provided by the University of Wyoming, that school responded by saying to the effect, "Because we're not babysitters and adults attend our university," unquote. It's not just the inability to respond to real events in a healthy way, my friends. I've been on these campuses, and literally the main observation I have is it's all about words. No substance, no outcomes, no measurable benefits to what they believe, just feelings and words. Further, any disagreements or questions raised on those feelings and words elicits a violent response. To paraphrase Gus Demos, because it's a blind loyalty to the ideology of words and no more. To be blunt, they want adherence and obedience, or else they will unleash violence and hate. This kind of response catches my attention because of the think tanks I worked with when I was with the Department of Defense and involved in graduate level study into things like this. There are analysts and foreign policy folks I knew in the 1980s and 1990s who dreamed of a day like this. An element of society who is more machine than human. Color, sound, symbols, and words are all that is required to make them passive or turn them into a raging mob. I've said it before, my friends, and some of you may think I'm joking, but if I could tell you all about the applications that are loaded onto your cell phones, you have no idea what they can do to you. An element of society for whom you just load the software and the machine performs flawlessly. One of the more creative weapons for this sort of reality remains memes in all their glory. Another couple of direct observations. First, last week I spoke to bartenders and wait staff in restaurants who've told me there have been near fist fights back in the kitchen over the election. Yes, it's indeed all one side, and unfortunately it's often women. Women demanding to know who people voted for, whether they want to state it out loud or not. Failure to state your candidate is an immediate admission of guilt. You didn't support her. Of course, the reality is more subtle. It's not that you didn't support her, it's that there was not a unified opposition to him. Those are two different things. It's not about the issues or direction of a country. It's purely a machine mobilized in rejection of a person. In the world of Rogue, a person who represents one of the globalist factions. My second example was while sitting at a restaurant one night. There was a table near my own where about 10 women were sitting there. And this isn't going to go the way you think. About 5 of the 10 women were reading out to the other women at the table groups of messages they received, text messages they received on their phones from family, friends, and coworkers. Fascinatingly, even the language of completely different people sending these text messages to the women at the table was like somebody was reading off of a 3x5 card. Other women were berating these women for failing to follow the accepted view and identity of what it means to be a woman in today's world by voting for someone other than Kamala. I mean, in fairness, they could have voted for Jill Stein of the Green Party or the Libertarians. None of which matters because the language in the messages I was overhearing was a failure to vote the correct way. And it was a vote for the patriarchy, a vote for misogyny, a vote for racism, a vote against people of color, a vote against alternative lifestyles, and the list goes on. Each of the 5 women, while reading the messages they received, all ended on the same note. The person sending it signed off with, "You're dead to me as a sister. You're dead to me as a sorority sister. I don't know how I can possibly work with you in the office. You're dead to me as a family member," and similar. I'm afraid we've lived long enough, to paraphrase Gus again, to see a living Borg in our modern world. Eastern perspective. This will be one of a couple of segments where I have correlations about Eastern Europe and specifically the movie Eastern Promises before I touch on the election. When the war in Ukraine began, let's ask ourselves some questions. When Iraq invaded Kuwait in 1991, of which they were suckered into it, by the way, what occurred? A massive effort by the United States, both publicly through the United Nations and privately with other countries, to put a coalition together. Resolutions were passed in the United Nations. There was much clutching of pearls and then military action, plus a ton of military aid to Saudi Arabia and others. Then years later, regarding both Bosnia and Serbia, the same approach by the United States. Yet Ukraine, certainly a bigger country with more geopolitical significance, we had none of that. Just money and weapons. So therefore, why? Why, with a larger country of greater global strategic significance and impact, was there no effort made to justify and legalize efforts via the United Nations and others on behalf of Ukraine? And for the big globalist crowd to leverage the very international regimes you claim this is all about, institutions like the UN. Probably because a lot of questions would be raised in the United Nations, and the mood of many countries towards the United States is not what it was in the 1990s. Further, like a courtroom, it would enable the Russians a global forum to respond. The last thing the United States wanted was to give Russia the global microphone, so that was not pursued. We've shared on Rogue a very strong argument can be made. A lot of what occurred in Ukraine was a money transfer from globalists in the United States to prop up the European Central Bank, an effort who's coming apart at the seams. Equally, to protect global money laundering in the country, cyber blackmail, narcotics trafficking, and the human tissue criminal enterprise who is Ukraine. That's not hyperbole, my friends. We literally have to think of Ukraine as 1930s Chicago, and I'm quite literal about that. Equally, within 48 hours of the U.S. election being concluded, the United States sent a number of new weapons to Ukraine. I'm sure those will show up on the arms black market shortly to further enrich leaders in Ukraine who are probably seeking property, if they haven't already, in Tel Aviv or the south of France now that their contract is up. Further, I'm not joking about their entertainment contracts either. I'll allude to that in a following segment. To wrap up Ukraine, remember, it was Brendan O'Connell who said several years ago the following about Ukraine. He said Israel was heavily involved. He said it was all fiction by the West, and it would end with an armistice or potentially a peace agreement with U.S. bases in Ukraine. So what was the media discussing within 24 hours after Donald Trump's presidential win? Supposedly the creation of an 800-mile buffer zone is being planned between Ukraine and Russia like what exists between the Koreas, also including new U.S. bases being established in Ukraine. There seems to be some debate over whether European or U.S. troops will patrol that buffer zone, but it'll still be a buffer zone. I know Brendan and others can, like him, can be a handful, and as always, trust but verify. But on this one, he and his sources called it years in advance. The election. Let us dig into the meat of the election. And as I often say with these things, we need a few weeks and months to pass to get the full picture and analysis. Equally, I know some of you might be thinking, well, Veles, you think the whole thing is heavily rigged, so why are you bothering? Yes, that's true, but I'm looking at the outcome from a few different angles. Some of my angles, frankly, may frustrate or even scare you, and I'm sorry for that. At the same time, it's my analysis, folks, and like any hypothesis or theory, it could be right or it could be wrong. I'm simply offering it for your consideration. You may do with it what you will. Along those lines, remember CNN and Fox News are entertainers masquerading as news organizations. Whether you like or don't like what either of those networks say, you feel that way because they know exactly how to make you feel one way or another. Equally, do not read their content on your cell phone, noting my earlier comment. The people working to inform and provide commentary are we at Rogue, or folks like Mike Moore at True Pundit, or Frank at Quite Frankly, or Lieutenant Colonel Stephen Murray, Tom Luongo, Matthew Arrett, and so many others. We, for lack of a better way of saying this, we in the alternative space, we are now the media. In fact, many of the people I just mentioned appear on one another's programs and work together behind the scenes. As a case in point, during Frank's election night coverage, he was nice enough to let me on his program to offer some thoughts around midnight during the election. I would add several of the people I just mentioned are all in one way or another saying what I'm about to share. To oversimplify, nothing about the week prior to the election and since is behaving the way it should. To use one of my Velesisms, I cannot take this seriously. Said another way, Joe Biden up to this point and Donald 2.0 is all of a fashion, possibly the same plan. Let me reference two good movie references. The first is the movie The Insider. Is Dr. Wygand telling the truth? Yes. Is it newsworthy? Yes. Are we going to air it? Of course not. Because he's not telling the truth? No, because the more truth he tells, the worse it gets. And the other is the movie Patton. There's absolutely no reason for us to assume the Germans are mounting a major offensive. The weather is awful, their supplies are low, and the German army hasn't mounted a winter offensive since Frederick the Great. And therefore, that's why I believe that's exactly what they're going to do. When it comes to our contemporary times, walk with me for a moment. Are the globalists and the powerful well organized? Yes. Do they thoroughly plan their intentions even if their plans do not work out exactly as they hoped? Yes. More specifically, when it comes to what we call technocracy, has anything about the forward momentum of technocratic ideas and plans changed? No. Do the goals of the technocracy include the global digital economy? Yes. Do many elements of those plans continue their forward momentum? Yes. Then why is the election of Joe Biden and now Donald Trump, as well as the last 8 years, anything but theater? I'm using the word theater very specifically because of the projects I worked on with the Department of Defense concerning the use of media to influence any global public. For all the hand-wringing, pontificating, and even an ESPN commentator named Steve Smith appearing on no less than Fox News, shockingly saying that Donald should be congratulated in this big game for such a big win, how is this not distraction and entertainment for we the little people? Meanwhile, the CEO of Carlyle Group, the famous private equity outfit, recently said this election removes a lot of uncertainty from the markets. First, I'm glad I even found that quote because it was like reading God's email. Second, that's hugely significant. Donald's election removes a lot of uncertainty from the markets. When someone like the CEO of the Carlyle Group says anything at all, folks, you need to pay attention. Small housekeeping item, Donald's first presidency was a one-term presidency who's unusual since the political behavior of the 1980s. Joe Biden was a one-term presidency, and now that Donald is back for his second term with rumors of a borderline purge of certain government officials. Let's be very cautious if something like that was to occur, or whether or not that's just pandering. There are people supposedly close to Trump saying they want to unleash the Department of Justice on their enemies. Hold the phone. How is that not the scene from the last Hunger Games movie where after defeating District 12, the new president says she wants a new Hunger Games of District 12's kids? Recall what I said when they went to George W. Bush after 9/11 and suggested running literal assassination squads across America for our quote-unquote enemies. Even hardcore neocons in his administration blocked that one because of what it could unleash. The 2020 election is believed by many to have been, in a word, rigged. We need further data confirmation, but it appears 20 million voters disappeared from the last election to this one in 2024. I'm quite serious about that, by the way. We have a delta in the voter returns from 2020 to 2024, where about 20 million voters or people disappeared. That's not a rounding error. Yes, I've seen some articles where the Associated Press and others have said, wait, no, we found those voters. Anywho, many believe the 2020 election was fraudulent. While many are basking in both relief and happiness at the outcome of this recent election, consider the following. How can you be certain the 2024 election is not fraudulent as well? Or said another way, fixed? Consider for a moment what happens to a country when you intentionally keep swinging the political pendulum from one extreme to another. Sure does keep the people's attention off of other things, doesn't it? Just ask Weimar Germany in the 1930s if you want some reference, because they've played this game before. Recall what I said about the planning of technocracy. You keep swinging that political pendulum between extremes until the public either A, asks for someone to save us in the Hegelian dialectic of plan idea, create problem, and offer solution, or B, we wake up and find these strange chains around us who weren't there before, and they strangely seem connected to our cell phones. I noted a moment ago Joe Biden was a one-term presidency, and I'm telling you that was by design. People were confused by his huge smile after the election. I'm not. His masters probably freed him of further service and could also allow him to leave this earth now free of his burdens. Joe Biden did what he was supposed to because they blackmailed him with his son's safety. The people who've been running the United States for the last 4 years made the White House and media do what they were supposed to do because that was the plan. The question is, shall the new administration continue the process just in a different way? Yes, I'm aware of Catherine Austin Fitts' concerns, as well as Lieutenant Colonel Murray and many others. This is not about my agreeing with them or others with a similar sentiment. I'm saying don't let your guard down, folks, ever, even if you think things are going your way. Ritual and ceremony, my friends, ritual and ceremony. Nothing on this earth is more important than the new economic system, and they have not quite flipped the switch on that one yet. Equally, that new economic system needs a control mechanism via technocratic control. It's why I do take very seriously the people who keep muttering that this may be one of our last elections. As many of you know, the popular vote thing is often at the heart of the anger about wanting to remove the Electoral College. Often in U.S. elections, the popular vote is highest for one candidate, but the Electoral College chooses another. This is a rarity indeed for a Republican candidate to win both the popular and Electoral College vote. They won't say it on mainstream media, but for people who believe in the political system, that's a biggie. Thank God the people who launched this country and then rewrote the Articles of the Confederation had good sense to set it up that way in the Constitution. Otherwise, to paraphrase a famous French philosopher, we would be voting ourselves money out of the Treasury far more than we already have been. There's also another amusing item about the popular vote. Some of you may know this from conversations on Discord or other sources. The state of Colorado in 2019 changed their state laws where their electors can only vote for whomever won the national popular vote. The creators of that law wishing to make sure their state electors always went to a Democrat candidate, even should the state vote for a Republican. Well, you reap what you sow. And this means even though Colorado has voted for Kamala Harris, their electors by state law must now go to Trump. Whoops. Another consideration is Joe Biden and others did everything possible to torpedo Kamala Harris's campaign. Never forget that. Perhaps that was indeed the deal Kamala made. We at Rogue were wondering about that earlier this year as our sources kept saying she was trying to get a deal to leave the White House and another candidate would run for president. It appears her deal was to play her role as the losing team to the Harlem Globetrotters in this media spectacle. You had demographics in this election who both notably got out and voted for Trump who were unheard of, some of the more notable being African Americans, Latin voters, and the Amish. There was a data point I posted on Discord this weekend who was very interesting. Even in traditionally blue states, the numbers of people voting red were markedly higher than prior elections. Consider for a moment a state like California. Many of that state's political center and right-wing citizens have moved to other states. Yet even among the people who remain in California, the trend is turning red. I do not see that in any way as a Republican endorsement. I see that as a vote against the big government social engineering policies in places like California. At the same time, if I'm wargaming my goals as a technocrat, that's a good sign. It means you've achieved the right level of energy in the public to move things forward. If I think the thing is heavily rigged, again, why am I covering this? Because you cannot act without the right intelligence. Equally because of my jingle about I can't take this seriously. If protesters really wanted to cause change on college campuses last spring, as well as currently, they could, but they didn't and they won't. They didn't because their tactics by design were intended to fail because they were supposed to fail because they were not supposed to achieve anything of substance. Please see the peace movement of the 1960s. Their demands for disclosure about how much money Israel spends at American universities as well as the U.S. Defense Department have gone nowhere. Even none other than West Coast universities have said they simply will not disclose those figures. If certain parties really wanted to go after Donald Trump, conversely, legally, they could have started with Jared Kushner, but they didn't. Donald Trump was made to appeal to a demographic who would fight to the death to protect him. Why would they? Why wouldn't they, as he's the only president who's been sued by the government this much? There were multiple attempts to bankrupt him and even kill him. Factors who made him popular not just with evangelical Christians, but also the African American community, among others. What other factual things do we have to make us ponder this situation? Various prosecutors are dropping legal actions against Donald. We also have federal agencies changing tune and several things internationally occurring, not the least of which is the near collapse of the German government. I'm not kidding about that either. You expect me to believe that all occurred because Donald was elected? You're kidding, right? First, if anything is legally going on against him, they still have 2 months to go. If they were acting the way I know most lawyers would act, they would go scorched earth before they need to step down with the presidential change. Someone told them to do that, period. Besides, what would those lawyers be worried about? Angering the judges in those cases? The judges are of the same political view, and those lawyers will go work for private practice law firms within 48 hours of stepping down. Foreign governments are making sudden changes because of a U.S. election? Again, you've got to be kidding me. No, I see plans within plans, to quote Dune. What does it all mean for us? The same thing it's always meant. Remain vigilant, look out for yourself and your families, and take a page from CJ's book about your continued need to monitor your local government officials and attend meetings. You need to file FOIAs and other information requests, which, by the way, folks, if you go online, those are actually fairly easy on most occasions to fill out. For that matter, go check your local sheriff's website and request records of you and your family if they have any. That also goes for your local police department. It's a public record, folks, and you have the legal right to review it. The Constitution still provides you immense power, and the level of self-awareness at the local level across the country is amazing and very positive. Remember, the outcome of the Chevron ruling is far more important than you can imagine, both at the national level and in your personal lives. We at Rogue will continue the journey with you, as will many others in the alternative space. Population ponderings. In 1998, during the collapse of the Asian tiger economies, a few academic papers came out following that event. A little color. In the mid-1990s, several Asian economies were doing quite well and were referred to generally as the tigers. Wealth development by countries not approved by the London Corporation will not be tolerated. So George Soros was sent in by Lord Malloch Brown and the London Corporation, and those countries' currencies were decimated. The effect went deeper than simply those economies taking a bullet. Birth rates plummeted, and that is very unlike Asia, given the cultural considerations. There are other factors at work during those years. First, slow them down or shut them down from developing wealth and success without obeying London. Second, as a social experiment, and recall my prior program where I mentioned the film The Forgotten. The economic hardship was so hard, couples ended pregnancies, avoided new pregnancies, and in many respects, the number of people getting married dropped. Those academic papers and later conferences I would attend for the defense community spoke highly of the, and I quote, positive outcome of reduced population. This was long before global warming concerns about carbon and related. Then there was that famous AFCEA conference I attended in the early 2000s I've told you about, the one where they were discussing causes of international conflict, and they tabled discussion about water, land rights, and ancient hatreds and similar. The sole focus was, how do we get the global population down? I would point out that conference organization, AFCEA, A-F-C-E-A, those are the same folks who had the summit during the election in Atlanta running a cyber attack simulation. My point on the population topic is beyond 1998, we have the global effects of the 2020 coup period of time. Less marriages and less kids are being born on top of the social lifestyle patterns of any child coming into being and are being greatly reduced. Not the least of which being the dink lifestyle of double income, no kids. That kind of thing is right out of Brave New World by Huxley. Then we have the effects of the inoculations as well. Keep in mind the average lifespans of 60 to 80 years. It only takes about a 10-year period of reduced births to create a significant reduction in the global population. Well, I have to admit, sure, even I was getting nervous when I saw in 1988 we had a global population of around 5 billion, and today it's 8 billion. Of course, fiddling with the global population like this can spiral out of control quickly if you're not careful. As I often say, the conferences I attended kept wondering about the timing. It's like the global surveillance state. They could have done it in the 1980s, but didn't. Of late, my hypothesis about that is due to ritual and ceremony of the world's elites that they couldn't act until now. They couldn't act because in their belief system, loosely said, the stars were not in the right position to do such a thing. Perhaps now they are. If we're headed towards some future Earth-wide disaster via the sun or some other cause, I could also understand why they want to reduce the world's population. But again, this is all hypothesis. When I think about some other pieces of global history, there's certainly a pattern by the world's elites to keep the herd at a manageable size. The importance of the Eastern Promises movie. The movie Eastern Promises with Viggo Mortensen has very deep relevance to our current world, and I also wanted to include it in today's program. My specific reference is the scene where Viggo's character is out with a Russian mafia leader's son, and they're drinking and partying at one of the mafia's private residences. These residences have women there who are forced into sex work and can rarely leave. It's not like the traditional view of a sex worker where they earn their own money or split it with a madam or a pimp. They are the mafia's property. Viggo's character is challenged by the mafia leader's son to have sex with one of the girls. He challenges Viggo's character by saying he's soft and challenges his manhood. As a result, Mortensen has sex with the girl. When it's over, he asks the girl where she's from and gives her a few €100 and an Orthodox icon of a saint as a prayer to her. His character is a Russian intelligence officer who's working with Scotland Yard to break up or control the Russian mafia families in London. So there's no cavalry or knight on a white horse to save this girl. He has to do his job, and he cannot do anything for her. More specifically, he cannot do anything for her in that moment. Two key takeaways about that scene. First, it's a very Eastern European way that scene was filmed and very true to the culture of Eastern Europe. Western audiences would expect him to carry her off, make some excuse, and shoot up the place and blame it on another mafia family, anything as long as he saves the girl. But that's not what happens. Equally, he doesn't need to give her money as she belongs to the mafia, and he works for the mafia. But he does anyway, and he asks her about where she's from and gives her an Orthodox icon card and says a prayer for her. Again, that's a very Eastern European reaction. It's the reality of the situation, and he has to do his job and carry out his mission. He does what he can within the limitations allowed to him. What is missed by some who've seen the film is he does intend later to try and go back and save her and get her home. However, she dies before that can happen, and it only serves to further his drive to complete his mission against the mafia. The second part of that is what that symbolically says about our world we all have to keep in mind. I'm talking about people who've been blackmailed, people who are in positions of authority, especially in this post-election world and various global events. One of the things I heard often nightly when I was in Washington, D.C., was discussions by a number of players about their fear of old D.C. insiders or older personnel in the defense world. This aligns with several things I've said recently about these blackmail systems. There are those for whom no matter how much you blackmail them, no matter how much you beat them down, there's still part of them waiting for an opportunity. They may die in the process, literally, but they no longer care because they're at the end of the road. As an example is the story I've told often about Colonel John Boyd, the guy I mentioned who was able to develop the F-16 fighter, a single-seat, sole-mission fighter without a bomber variant or a variant for the Navy with a single engine, all of which were things in violation of the politics at the Pentagon. How did he pull it off? He pulled it off because he understood the dynamic I just mentioned. He leveraged a bunch of people near retirement at the Pentagon who've been wanting to get even for their entire careers. He was able to outmaneuver and outplan a ton of people in the Pentagon committed to stopping him and his stupid single-role fighter. He built for years an index of folks he knew could help him at the right time as their careers were essentially over anyway. I cannot tell you, folks, of the fear of people like that in Washington, D.C. They're an antithesis to the parasites who operate there. This is also why several major Hollywood figures, senior banking people, scientists, and many others I can reference, have terminal accidents in their later years. It's like that scene from the movie Goodfellas, where the mafia dons are debating killing one of their own. They look at Remo Gaggi, and Remo says, why take a chance? At least that's my opinion. There are powerful people who operate that way, people who know things. They know some downright horrible things. They're waiting until they can get a chance to do something. This does not mean everything is okay, nor we can just sit back and let others save the day. We're all in this together, and we have to look out for ourselves. If people like this can tip the scales to our favor, great, but don't live your life counting on it. In my opinion, I believe Donald Trump has been able to pull off a potential second presidency because he has backing from powerful factions, among them sovereign-minded bankers and people connected to Silicon Valley. Does this mean they're the good guys? Absolutely not. It means they're powerful and they can make things happen who may be to our benefit, but it will always be to their benefit first. Like anything else, we'll have to wait and see. There's simply no universe where people like that do not have an agenda. Whether their agenda and Donald's agenda will gel together, we'll see. Equally, he could surprise everyone by turning out to be a triple agent for a new globalist faction, his own interests, or both. We know from history that Donald always plans the heck out of things before he does something. Like Eastern promises, there are degrees of things he can do, but within certain limits. But we'll have to see. Sovereign. An important soundbite from Matthew Arrett. No country, no international state can be truly sovereign if it is not economically sovereign. That may not sound like much, but it's a very significant statement for this reason. For years, the big brains in international affairs have said you have sovereignty if you control your borders, your foreign policy, and your own government. What's missing in that narrative is your economy. Any country can control its borders and its government and even foreign affairs and still technically not be sovereign. They're not sovereign because they don't control their currency or their economy. An excellent example of this are any of the Commonwealth countries of Britain, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, and others. What is really at the root of Tom Luongo's commentary and Matthews, among others, is this economic angle. Right now, the fight in the United States is not over the election. It's over, can powerful people in the U.S. sustain sovereign control of our currency and economy as much as the government? You could make the argument the election demonstrates we just achieved both government and economic sovereignty from the globalists or something like it. So let's talk about the global factions following Eastern promises and the topic of sovereignty. Even if Davos has severely harmed the interests of the London Corporation, that does not mean necessarily it's to our benefit. It's to the benefit of Davos. And if we can exploit it personally, that's great. But remember some very important things. The battle between the London Corporation and Davos is like what my great-grandmother said in our Milwaukee tavern in the 1930s. She would often say the only difference between communism and National Socialism was one wanted to kill the United States with a knife and the other one with a gun. The same is true of Davos and London. Neither of them wishes the United States anything but ill. So what are we to do? This is where you have to recall Tom Luongo's comment about when you have multiplayer games, you cannot become so angry at one player it clouds your judgment. Tom Luongo recently said there are threads of revelation out there that the following may have occurred. The London Corporation, contrary to what you might believe, has been severely brought low based on several things, not the least of which is the lengthy segment I had on my last program about all these blackmail networks being eliminated. When a major player among the apex elites has those kinds of problems, it's an opportunity. According to Tom, and we need more data on this, he projects a lighter, nimbler form of the London Corporation will come out of this conflict, most probably, in my opinion, with some key changes in its leadership. They will lose assets and influence, but they're not out of the game by a long shot. Remember, they've been at this for more than 500 years, and if they ever truly were about to get wiped out, they would take us all down with them. Here's the bombshell. It appears Donald may have aligned himself with that new and improved London Corporation. This in addition to the intelligence community and Silicon Valley players along with sovereign bankers, as I mentioned previously. It means an outcome where the United States regains its political sovereignty as much as economic on yet another occasion, because this has all happened before. For those of you who recall my program about the London Corporation attempts to retake the United States, we're talking about the U.S. Revolution itself in 1776, the War of 1812, the War between the States, or Civil War, who began in 1861, and the shelving of plans to retake the United States by the London Corporation after World War I. Of note, recall the amount of effort it took U.S. President Andrew Jackson to shut down the first bank of the United States. The other important item about Jackson's move is he paid off the U.S. debt completely. Based on what we know today, do you think the London Corporation, Venice, and the Swiss might not be a little upset about that? Within 30 years of that event, what occurred? The Civil War, the war between the states, who created in that vacuum 14 central banks. Wait, Veles, what? Yes, you heard me correct. 14 central banks. Being a confederacy, the South had a central bank in each of its 13 states, and the United States had to recreate its central bank to fund the war. Granted, the United States was reunified, but the central bank remained. In contemporary times, when the smoke clears, the U.S. will have gained back its sovereignty in both politics and economics from London. In the case of the latter, because you have Powell in charge of the Fed and someone more sovereign headed to run the Treasury. In the case of the former, due to several other things. Cautiously, that doesn't mean the London Corporation doesn't have influence. They will retain influence over the United States. However, they will no longer have sovereign control of our political structure or our economic. This is why allies of Davos in our political and economic system now need to be hunted down with vigor. I believe elements of the U.S. intelligence community and military have been quietly operating in the wings. No, this has nothing to do with white hats out to save America or any related rumors you heard 4 or more years ago. This is practicality on the part of the sovereigntists, such as Jerome Powell, Jamie Dimon, and factions in Silicon Valley, among others. To paraphrase the movie Constantine, it restores a balance among the great powers. In a moment of being candid, this is where I have to get my own feelings under control, because we're talking about some real Game of Thrones pragmatism here. I cannot express to all of you a comment you've heard me made often about the depth of my rage towards the London Corporation. Ireland's famine, Scotland's clearances, and the fall of Imperial Russia and the murder of the royal family, among so many other events they caused. It's a toss-up who hurt Africa more, whether it was the London Corporation or King Leopold II of Belgium. Even I realized the need for me to get my emotions and alliances into a more pragmatic worldview. If a form of America, even if balkanized, can be preserved, then it's a far better outcome. There's an excellent example of this dynamic from the little-known book and TV program from the 1980s. Noting the recent passing of the actor and musician Chris Christopherson, he appeared in a TV adaptation of that book, which was called America, with instead of the letter C, a K on the end. Loosely, the storyline was about how the Soviet Union found a way to defeat the United States and make it a vassal state. The story centers on Christopherson's character, who once ran for president, drive to restore the United States to, say it with me, a sovereign government and sovereign financial system again. In parallel with that, in the storyline, is the fact the Soviet Union is collapsing, and they're desperate. Namely, they're going to, say it with me again, break up the United States into 4 separate sovereign countries, or balkanize the United States. Sovereign countries to free up America's creativity to help lift the Soviet Union out of its food shortages and similar. First of those is the heartland of the United States with a new flag and government. The scene towards the end has Christopherson and a group of rebels holding a studio where Christopherson's character is going to address the people of the United States and appeal for a resistance to the Soviet occupation. A U.S. military general who will now lead the military of the first of the 4 new independent countries breaks into the studio and confronts him. Loosely said, their conversation was this. Christopherson said, now is the time to restore America. The general tells him the means to do that no longer exists, but a form of America and these new sovereign states may save everyone. The general asks him to not broadcast his message and join him to give legitimacy to the new country. Christopherson's character slowly turns to the microphone and is about to flip the switch to go live, and you only hear a shot ring out as the general shoots him dead. The storyline being the general was right. The only way forward was something very hard to consider, but just as necessary. The alternative was a complete global breakdown. As a result, Christopherson's character had to die. Am I saying that's what we're facing? Not exactly. But what I am saying is all of us, myself included, have to get our facts straight on what the new world hurtling at us is going to be, then develop our own personal and larger strategies for how to deal with it. At the same time, no matter how disgusted I am by the idea of working with the London Corporation, the balance between them and Davos must be maintained. Davos is just as interested in population control and a technocratic world currency. Does this mean by aligning with the London Corporation to a degree means an endorsement of who and what they are? Absolutely not. Remember, the Allies during World War II aligned with Stalin for practical reasons. There's a plethora of things I could go into about even what a passive alignment with the London Corporation means. Do I believe the blackmail networks who've been stopped will be back in business again? No, because there's still many types of blackmail networks still operating. However, they will be greatly reduced, and we have much yet to learn about Hollywood and the rap world who will be forthcoming. If just half the rumors of what was going on in Hollywood are true, even for the red-pilled among us, believing may still be quite difficult. In conclusion, if you've ever studied or watched a documentary about how devastating the Bronze Age collapse was, you don't want to revisit that part of world history in modern times. It means balances of power must be maintained even with some pretty bad actors. We need a 3-way balance between Davos, London, and the various sovereign actors, who also include significant changes recently in Japan, especially with their central bank, Germany, and Turkey, among others. Perhaps it's hyperbole, but there are some commentators in Germany who, within the last 48 hours, believe drastic measures are necessary to save that country. The Germans are not known for getting excitable, and I believe that there's more going on there than we know. In the end, the game never ends. Equally, we need to determine if Donald is a change in direction from the technocratic future, a different version of it, or if this is all going according to plan. I yield the floor. V.
Yeah. Veles, that was a great run-up. Lots of things to digest there, folks. And again, folks, I recommend that you guys go back and listen to this program again. Take your notes, have your dark roast ready, because this is an intelligence drop like no one else's business. Veles, thank you for coming on and sharing this with us. Very important key things that people need to focus on, that we need to keep our head on the swivel. The fight's not over, and the fog of uncertainty is still there in a lot of regards. We need to keep sharp. Veles, we appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, my friend. And folks, I'll be attending a conference who will be reviewing a lot of emergency planning things. And obviously, if anything pops up, I think you need to know about, I'll let you know.
Absolutely. Thank you all for listening. We'll be back tomorrow. Take care, everybody. Cheers.